Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jacob Abrahamson, and I'm a junior McConnell Scholar. 25 years ago, the McConnell Center began as an idea to attract and nurture outstanding young leaders for Kentucky. Since then, more than 230 students have been through our program and have been given more than $3.5 million in scholarships. And the center has grown well beyond its simple founding vision. As the year goes on, we will highlight one aspect of our program at each of our public events. In January, we highlighted our growing partnerships with the American military, and tonight it is my honor to be part of this event with Dr. Fornieri and to be a part of telling you about the McConnell Center's record of producing and supporting books, documentaries, public conferences, and contributing to the literary efforts to remember our history and serve our future. The McConnell Center has produced several books, including The Senate, Great Form of Constitutional Liberty, authored by former Senator Robert C. Byrd, George Washington, A Pictorial History, America's Forgotten Founders, Hero Tales from American History, originally published by Henry Cabot Lodge and Teddy Roosevelt, but now in a special edition featuring Senator Mitch McConnell and Art Director Gary Gregg. You may have found that book outside at our table. And we have now distributed nearly 40,000 pocket constitutions to Kentucky teachers and students. We've hosted conferences and produced studies on presidential elections and leadership in the U.S. Senate that garnered national attention. Look for an important new study on civic literacy in Kentucky coming later in 2016 and a conference on women in Kentucky politics coming this May. Over the last few years, the McConnell Center has also helped make documentaries possible on the great statesman Henry Clay and the Kentucky frontiersman Daniel Boone, both of which have now found wide audiences. It has also helped make the recent film Dreamers and Doers, Voices of Kentucky Women, produced by the Kentucky Commission on Women. And very appropriately, we are pleased to announce tonight that our latest partnership with Witnessing History will result in the new film, I Remember the Old Home Very Well, The Lincolns of Kentucky, which will have its broadcast premiere on KET tonight, literally Dr. Fornieri's talk. KET's schedule as it will be times over the coming weeks on public television. Tonight, we continue our year-long series exploring that essential topic of citizenship and statesmanship. In this important election year, we don't think there are much more important topics than the intersection between citizens and political leadership. Tonight, on Abraham Lincoln's 207th birthday, it's a real privilege for us to have Dr. Joseph Fornieri with us, who's the author of the new book, Abraham Lincoln, Philosopher-Statesman. Joseph Fornieri is professor of political science at the Rochester Institute of Technology and the director of the Center for Statesmanship Law. He's the author of Abraham Lincoln's Political Faith, an acclaimed scholarly work that explores Lincoln's religion and politics. He's also the author-editor of 3 other books on Abraham Lincoln's political thought and statesmanship, including The Language of Liberty, The Political Speeches and Writings, Lincoln's Political Perspectives, and Lincoln's America. His latest book has recently won a prize for superior scholarship from the Illinois Historical Society. Perhaps most importantly, he enjoys cigars and on the side plays in a blues band, the East End Drifters, with his brother Peter. He may sing for us tonight, who knows? Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Joe Fornieri.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's a real honor to be here and a pleasure to help celebrate Abraham Lincoln's birthday. I want to extend my gratitude to Professor Gary Gregg and all the good work he's done here at the center in keeping statesmanship alive. Tonight I'm going to discuss 2 moments of statesmanship, and I want you to look at these images here. Here's Lincoln in December 1861. I'll explain this shortly. This is the first moment of statesmanship that I'm going to discuss. And we see Lincoln newly elected. He had just grown his beard. And then August 1864, this picture is from around that time, the Gardner picture, and we can see the toll that the war took on Lincoln. There's only a 3-year interval between these photographs, which really are worth 1,000 words in terms of chronicling the suffering of the war. I need not remind you that Abraham Lincoln is your native son. He was born right here in Hardin, Kentucky. So again, another special honor to be part of this celebration. here are some of the Kentucky friends and family of Abraham Lincoln you may know. Joshua Speed, Abraham Lincoln's best friend, his roommate in Springfield, Illinois. I heard his plantation is still in very good condition, and I regret that I haven't seen it. Maybe I can sneak it in tomorrow. Here is the great Senator Henry Clay, whom Lincoln described as his beau ideal of a statesman. And of course, here's Mary Todd Lincoln, the Todd family, notable family from Kentucky. So Kentucky loomed very large in Lincoln's life. I'm also mindful that this is a border state with those fighting for both blue and gray during the war. Lincoln recognized the strategic importance of Kentucky to the Union cause. You may remember that he once said to Orville Browning, one of his political operatives during the crisis, that I think to lose Kentucky is nearly the same as to lose the whole gang. But he said it another way, I think, that really captures Lincoln, that I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky. And apparently this was just repeated by Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Donald Trump. So they're looking for your votes, okay? You folks are unhappy with the whole lot. So just a little personal history about Kentucky, and you can see where the star is, Rochester, New York. You can see that I'm not from New York City. And this profound observation was made by a tall Texan a few years ago when Professor Gregg came out to Rochester, New York, and we discussed politics over Kentucky bourbon and cigars and my friend's man cave. The tall Texan, who was a scholar on Henry Clay, tragically, he just passed away untimely. He was a wonderful person. His name was Randall Strahan. And he observed, he said, Joe, you know, the further north you go from New York City, the further south things become. And so I like to think of Rochester as a border state with kind of an Italian flair. Happy cultural parallels here. My purpose tonight, our purpose is to really, there we go. Purpose is to consider, first of all, what constitutes Lincoln's greatness. Doris Kearns Goodwin, famously in Team of Rivals, says that it's Lincoln's managerial expertise, his ability to manage the strong egos of his cabinet. But we know that managerial expertise could be used for wicked ends as well as for just or noble ends. It doesn't completely capture Lincoln's political greatness. My book, I mentioned here, is a work of political philosophy. It really explores the question, the what is question, really trying to get to the essence of, or the nature of a thing. Rather than a historical narrative, it provides an account of the nature of political greatness as such, its embodiment in Lincoln, and the standard used to judge it. What criteria, what yardstick do we use to measure political greatness? What distinguishes a mere politician from a great statesman? Is one man's freedom fighter another man's terrorist? Are all these standards relative, or is there a reliable standard? What kind of leader was Lincoln then? Was he, as some people argue, and we're going to look at tonight, a pragmatist? And I mean this in a pejorative sense. Someone who was big on success, but short on principles. A horse trader who really had no moral compass beyond self-interest, success, and expediency, a good bargainer. Does that describe Lincoln's leadership? Was he a realist, like Bismarck? You know, the issues of the day are decided by iron and blood. And really what matters are naked considerations of power. Was he an ideologue who sought to radically transform the status quo? regardless of the limits of politics and the constraints of the rule of law, kind of intoxicated with the utopian vision of politics, and sought to impose that vision upon recalcitrant matter at any cost. Do these labels describe Lincoln? I argue in my book, no. I consider each of these descriptions that they fail to capture Lincoln's statesmanship and distort this statesmanship. I described Lincoln as a philosopher-statesman. What do I mean by that? Well, someone who combines greatness of thought. Lincoln was a great thinker. He had a great mind. And his intellect was used to provide an ultimate moral justification for the Union and for free labor in response to rival interpretations, rival pro-slavery interpretations, rival interpretations that critiqued free labor. So Lincoln was a great thinker who understood the nature and the character of self-government and has provided one of its most enduring expressions, for example, in the Gettysburg Address. We could see Lincoln as a great teacher of democracy, along with Plato and Aristotle. But as a philosopher-statesman, Lincoln's greatness was not only one that consisted of thought, but of deed as well. Okay, he was able to translate his political vision into action, and the key virtue here is prudence or practical wisdom, being able to apply moral principles under the circumstances. So Lincoln was someone who united both theory and practice and combined greatness of thought and greatness of action. I discussed 6 dimensions of Lincoln's philosophical statesmanship. I will discuss one of them in a little more length tonight. But just so you can see, as I mentioned, I began this talk with the question of what constitutes Lincoln's political greatness and what constitutes statesmanship, as opposed to mere politicking. Wisdom, and by this I mean theoretical wisdom, vision, we can say. This is a crucial ingredient of Lincoln's philosophical statesmanship, a vision that is grounded upon a sober understanding of human nature and society, that understands the timeless truths about human nature. But prudence, the ability to apply moral principles under the circumstance, to realize as much as the good of the good as possible. And this means understanding the limits of politics and the constraints of the rule of law. Lincoln was no utopian, but neither was he simply a shrewd, cunning pragmatist. He was rather prudent. Duty. When we look at statesmanship, we always have to consider duty and constitutional boundaries, the oath of office. Statesmanship differs from other types of leadership. Very often we talk about political leadership and we compare it to CEOs or business leadership. There are some similarities, yet to reduce statesmanship to a business leadership or managerial expertise or salesmanship does not do full justice to what we mean by the concept. A statesman is both empowered and limited by duty, right? And we judge statesmen and stateswomen by how they perform their duty. Do they shrink from their duty through cowardice? Do they transgress the boundaries, constitutional boundaries, and act in a tyrannical manner, thereby ignoring their constitutional duties? So duty is an important ingredient of our consideration of statesmanship. Lincoln had an oath-bound duty to preserve the Union. He took that very seriously, as opposed to President Buchanan. Magnanimity. I'll speak to this in a moment at the end of the talk. By this we mean greatness of soul. I don't mean to be circular here. What does Lincoln's greatness consist of? It consists of greatness of soul. My approach is very much informed by Thomas Aquinas' understanding of magnanimity, as greatness of soul is being informed by the Christian norms of humility and charity. And that magnanimity is the virtue of performing great deeds on a great scale, and also involving one's approach to great honors. The magnanimous individual is concerned with honors, but it is an honorable ambition that serves some higher good and some greater cause than self-interest, and also involving a willingness to sacrifice for core principles. So I'll speak at greater length to this later on. And patriotism, interestingly enough, not jingoism, not nationalism, but an ordinate love of one's country that strives to make one's country worthy of loving. So these are really the 6 dimensions, the ingredients of Lincoln's philosophical statesmanship that I discuss in my book. Now, the topic of tonight's talk, 2 moments of Lincoln's statesmanship. I'm sorry, the buzz is distracting me. Is there a way we can take care of it? It's hard for me to. I'm at a gig, you know, and
It's this microphone here. It doesn't have anything to do with it.
yeah, I apologize, folks. It's just distracted me. Is that better? All right, there we go. Did it distract you? Was that whole 10 minutes ruined? I'm sorry. Hello? Okay. We provided this background. We'll step up on track now. Sorry about that. I'm glad I pulled the plug on that because it was distracting you as much as it was me. The topic of my talk tonight are 2 moments of statesmanship. And the topic really emerged through my conversations with Professor Gregg. Instead of discussing virtues or qualities of statesmanship in the abstract, or to look at them as ideas in the abstract, I wanted to focus on, Gary directed me to focus on 2 moments that clearly reveal Lincoln's statesmanship. 2 snapshots, if you will, that we can focus upon that really embody some of these qualities of prudence, of magnanimity, of patriotism. And here we see a convergence of the idea in the event. Political theorists like myself, political philosophers love to speculate, love to engage in theory, and that's important because we're always guided by norms. We can't evade considerations of what is just, what is unjust, what is noble, what is base, what is good, what is true, what is beautiful. And that implies some timeless standard. Our whole nation is grounded upon the timeless truth that all men are created equal. Yet, it's important to keep in mind that we're dealing with concrete individuals who operated under constraints of time and place. And that's what we mean by the particular. So these moments of statesmanship involve a convergence of the idea, the virtue, the norm, and the particular circumstances that Lincoln as a statesman had to react to, had to deal with. Okay. These 2 related moments, and they're both electoral moments, okay, can be seen as bookends that frame Lincoln's statesmanship, to use an analogy. One is the secession winter, if we have to narrow it down to a month, it would be December 1861. And this is coming off a moment of both victory. The Republicans had won the election in November of 1860, but also crisis. The secession begins with South Carolina in December of 1860. So that actually should say December 1860. Sorry about that. And the next is the summer of 1864, particularly August of 1864. This was one of the lowest points of the Lincoln administration. And Lincoln was under pressure here to revoke the Emancipation Proclamation for purposes of re-election. And I want to tell that story. I want to look at that moment. These moments have three common denominators. One is both occur during wartime elections in an unprecedented crisis. And therefore, related to this, one of the key principles in both of these moments where Lincoln has to deliberate upon the fate of the nation is the principle, maintaining the principle of free elections and Republican government. Okay? That is what is at stake in each case. And finally, each of these moments, I hope to show, display a principled statesmanship, something much more than pragmatism, and a prudence, a practical wisdom moved by an honorable ambition in which there are moral boundaries to that ambition, to that drive for recognition. These two moments can be seen as tests of character and judgment. We can see, the expression tempered strength is often used to describe prudence or practical wisdom, and that we really test mettle through adversity. Likewise, we test a statesman's character in terms of great crises, in terms of these moments of decision and deliberation under nearly impossible circumstances. I want to provide the historical context to the secession winter, okay? December 20th, it's a mistake again, it should say 1860. December 20th, 1860 to March 4th, 1861, so that's correct. Historians describe this interval of time as the secession winter. What's going on and how does this affect Lincoln's statesmanship? How are these circumstances important in providing a fuller picture of how the 16th president acted and how we could judge his actions under these circumstances? Lincoln was elected in November 6, 1860. He was not even included on the ballot in 10 of the states in the South. Wasn't even included. The Republican Party was viewed by some of the southern states as an illegal party that had advocated the restriction of slavery contrary to the court's ruling in Dred Scott versus Sanford. So we often forget that Lincoln was elected notwithstanding that fact that he was not even included on the ballots in 10 states. He won with 39% of the popular vote, but he won a clear electoral majority to carry the election. On December 20th, you can see just a little more than a month after his election, South Carolina secedes. Lincoln has not been inaugurated. He was not inaugurated until March. That's how things worked before the 22nd Amendment, which changed the date, probably to avoid the same scenario that we had during the Civil War, where you have a crisis and the incumbent president remains in office until late or mid-spring. In December, month of December, after South Carolina seceded, there were efforts to prevent war and to prevent further secession, known as the Crittenden Compromise and the Crittenden Compromise measures. To summarize, the Crittenden Compromise proposed extending the Missouri Compromise line to the west. Okay, the Missouri Compromise of 1820 prohibited slavery north of the 3630 line, north of Missouri's southern border, in the territory of the Louisiana Purchase. So one of the proposals by Crittenden is to avoid the crisis, okay, that line would be drawn straight to the west coast, okay, and so north of the line, 3630, slavery would be restricted, south of the line, it would be permitted. As we'll see, Lincoln pursues during the secession winter a policy of silence. He pursues a policy of silence before he is inaugurated, with a few exceptions. But behind the scenes, he works to defeat the Crittenden Compromise. and we'll see why. There's a seizure of federal property, forts, and arsenals, most notably the seizure of forts at South Carolina, and we know that the contingent moved to Fort Sumter after retreating back from Fort Moultrie, I believe it was, in Charleston Harbor. On February 1st, 1861, you had the secession of the lower South in 7 states. The upper South and the border states held the strategic balance of power, as we know. This is the context of Lincoln's remarks. I hope God is on our side, but I must have Kentucky on our side. On February 4th, 1861, the Confederacy is formed. Again, all of this before Lincoln is inaugurated on March 4th, 1861. April 12th, we'll just note that this is when the bombing of Fort Sumter occurs, the bombardment of Fort Sumter. Lincoln's statesmanship can be contrasted to that of his predecessor, James Buchanan, who in his annual message of December 3rd, 1860, right around during the secession winter and after South Carolina's secession, blames the conflict on abolitionist agitation, the long-continued and intemperate interference of the northern people with the question of slavery in the southern states has at length produced its natural effects. We might, psychologists today might call this enabling. Okay? We might call this enabling. He also, in this same speech, claimed that while secession was unconstitutional, the Constitution provided no authority, no power on the part of Congress or the chief executive to suppress secession or to force a state to remain within the Union. And some historians have described this, William Lee Miller, who I think is a wonderful historian on Lincoln, have described this as a declaration of impotence. Okay, so clearly, when we look at Buchanan's duty, he shrunk from it. He emasculated the office and shrunk from his obligation to uphold the Constitution. With Lincoln, there'd be quite a different president. Lincoln is regarded as a pragmatist in many circles. Now, the term pragmatism can be defined in many different ways. It could refer to a philosophical school. But I think most of us, and I actually went on the internet, I wanted a kind of a common sense definition that's used in everyday speech. And this comes close. It's dispensing with all absolute principles and standards, that there's no such thing as an objective reality or permanent truth. The truth is that which works. You know, if it works, it's good. Nothing is inherently good or evil. Whatever is successful. And anyone who holds any firm convictions of his own is an arbitrary, mystic dogmatist. You're intolerant. You're so intolerant that you should tolerate intolerance. So this is the view, I think, in many circles that informs, and students are taught this. Lincoln was a pragmatist, and we consider this a virtue in some circles, right? That you know, we want to avoid difficult moral questions because they're freighted with conflict, and we want to avoid conflict. In America, we can avoid this scenario of the Civil War if we simply don't judge each other too harshly, okay? And therefore, we could always find, as it's kind of an American optimism, we can always find a compromise, a middle of the road. The danger is that you stand ultimately for nothing, that there are no core principles. The pragmatist, as I said, is big on results, big on success, short on principles, lacks a reliable moral compass. And you can't trust the pragmatist. The pragmatist is going to, inevitably going to surprise you if you depend upon that individual in politics or in your life. We'll kind of go with where the wind blows. Now, James McGregor Burns, in his leadership book, I see you folks have it upstairs, devotes very few pages to Lincoln, interestingly enough. And he regards Lincoln as a pragmatist in this sense, someone who was a master manipulator and could read the political winds and was effective at succeeding, however you may define that, even at the cost of constitutional and moral principle. Also, here he is, isn't he lovely? You know, and I'm a little older than you guys. We thought this was all done after the Cold War. It continues, so long story. I had read an article that I think also illustrates some of the problems with philosophical categories and why philosophy, clear philosophy in regard to this, is important in providing a clearer picture and capturing the truth rather than these categories that may distort things. The argument is, and it may apply to Putin, but it doesn't apply to Lincoln. You know, is Putin either an ideologue or a pragmatist, right? I think both of these labels distort statesmanship, or we could say both of them fail to capture statesmanship. Statesmanship can be seen as a mean between these two extremes. The ideologue is blinded by moral principles and is willing to override all other concerns for the sake of realizing a moral principle in the abstract, right? Let heavens be done to the just till, justice be done to the heavens fall. The danger of that is you could if you're blind to the consequences of actions, you could undermine the very goals that you seek to achieve, right? Classic case of the utopian ideologue is that horrible policy of prohibition, right? We could all, for the sake of argument, say that excessive drinking isn't a good thing, okay? And we need to be moderate. We need to enjoy Kentucky bourbon without doing too much of it, and celebrate it as a great gift. At the same time, do you remedy all the evil effects of alcohol by completely prohibiting it? We can acknowledge that there are problems associated with it, but the unintended consequences of prohibiting alcohol were far worse than the toleration of alcohol in the first place. So the ideologue is zealous and uncompromising in his or her fixation upon principles. And this, I think the reference here is that he wants to restore the Russian Empire. That's his vision, and will do it at any cost. The pragmatist, on the other hand, is short on principles and long on success. That the pragmatist, as we mentioned, is someone who is blind to moral principles in politics, is a shrewd Machiavellian manipulator. We could really use the word pragmatist and cunning interchangeably here. And Putin probably is both, right? So the article is okay, but we don't want to apply these categories to statesmanship. In fact, we want to distinguish statesmanship from both of these categories. All right. Now we're going to look at some primary sources where we're going to focus on these moments, okay, of the secession winter. See to what extent Lincoln was. Is it justifiable to regard him as a pragmatist? And I think you'll see no. We'll see someone firmly dedicated to core principles who was unmovable. John A. Gilmer was a North Carolinian, and he had written Lincoln asking him about what course of action the president-elect would pursue. Now, I mentioned a moment ago, Lincoln pursued a policy of silence. He felt that he had amply made clear his policy through the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which were published, through his Cooper Institute address, which was published, through the Republican platform, and that any speeches in the interval during the secession crisis would just be used against him. Okay, it would be used against him, or twisted or distorted. So But he did, on a few occasions, between the lines, make clear his position. And so history has, yes? Oh, I'm sorry, December 15th, 1860. I don't know how that got sliced off, I'm sorry. It's 1860. Okay. This is before Lincoln is inaugurated, and it's at the time of the Crittenden Compromise, where there's an effort to avoid the conflict. On the territorial question, that means the authority of the federal government to restrict slavery in the territories. This is the core principle of the Republican Party. Not to forcibly abolish slavery in the states where it exists. Okay? There, Lincoln parts company with the radicals and the ideologues. He believed that the Constitution had established a firewall between the federal government and state slavery. One could erect a moral blockade against slavery and seek to put it on a path of ultimate extinction, but one could not forcibly abolish it where it already existed. Kentucky, for example. Okay? That had to be done by the states themselves, at least in a time of peace, before a crisis changes the status quo and changes what is constitutionally possible. So, yet, this territorial question, okay, whether or not slavery should be allowed to spread into new territories that we acquired from Mexico during the Mexican War, and territories out west, just as I had mentioned with the Crittenden Compromise, seeking to extend the line all the way to California, Lincoln says, I am inflexible. On that, there is a difference between you and us, you, the North, and the South. And it is the only substantial difference. You think slavery is right, the only substantial. That's an understatement, right? The difference would become irreconcilable. You think slavery is right and ought to be extended, we think it is wrong and ought to be restricted. Here, it is a statesman defining the key issue with clarity. Not obfuscation here, but clarity, the key moral issue at stake. And he was asked to provide further explanation of his policies, of the policies he would take, and he replies to Gilmer that, what reason have I to expect that any additional production of mine would meet a better fate? That means no one's listened to him already. South Carolina has seceded. This is crucial because I mentioned that the common denominator between these two moments are maintaining the integrity of free elections. Free elections, the Union and Republican government go together. Okay? They are all corollaries. One implies the other. If one falls, all of them fall. Lincoln says, it would make me appear as if I repented for the crime of having been elected and was anxious to apologize and beg forgiveness. Now, this isn't pride here. This is the integrity of elections and whether or not a fair election can be undermined through extortion when the losing party does not gain its way. What a precedent this would set for the future of the republic. And Lincoln recognizes what's at issue here early on. Lyman Trumbull, this is Lincoln's political operative in Illinois. My dear sir, Lincoln's working behind the scenes. Lyman Trumbull's negotiating, horse trading, compromising, possibly with those that want to extend slavery to the West. Lincoln makes it clear. Let there be no compromise on the question of extending slavery. If there be, all our labor is lost, and ere long must be done again. Stand firm. The tug has to come, and better now than any time hereafter. Okay? There is a resolution here. There is a firmness of conviction and of courageous magnanimity to preserve the Union and preserve the core principles for which it stands. The principle of equality in the Declaration and the principle of free elections. Here he says the same thing. Notice the time frame of all of these. They're all occurring around December 13th, December 10th, December 11th, December 13th. So Lincoln says this to another political operative. Prevent as far as possible any of our friends from demoralizing themselves and our cause by entertaining propositions for compromise of any sort on slavery extension. There is no possible compromise upon it, but which puts us under again. He's talking about the core principles of the Republican Party, and leaves all our work to do over again. On that point, hold firm as with a chain of steel. This is not the words of a pragmatist. This is not the words or the policy of a horse trader. Again, Lincoln explains his rationale to James Hale. Look at the date, again, about a month later. We have just carried in an election on principles fairly stated to the people. Now we are told in advance the government shall be broken up unless we surrender to those we have been beaten before we take the offices. Either way, if we surrender, it is the end of us and of the government. This establishes a terrible precedent. As Lincoln said, secession is the very essence of anarchy. The state cannot unilaterally decide to withdraw from the Union if it loses an election. They will repeat the experiment upon us ad libitum. And they could never have a more shallow pretext for breaking up the government or extorting a compromise than now. Lincoln recognized this was a kind of extortion to gain a policy of slavery expansion that had been defeated at the polls through a fair election. Now, Lincoln summarizes, I think, most cogently and in a clear philosophical manner the reasons for why the rebellion had to be suppressed in his message to Congress, 4th of July, 1861. And again, we see this overriding principle of maintaining the integrity of free elections, and how the contest is a test. It is a test of that principle. A popular government has often been called an experiment. 2 points in it our people have already settled: the successful establishing during the Constitutional Convention and the successful administrating of it. One still remains: its successful maintenance against a formidable internal attempt to overthrow it. Lincoln continues. You can see how his use of metaphor here is very effective in shaping the public mind and defining the conflict. It is now that for the people to demonstrate to the world what's at stake here is something more than just the American Republic, but the fate of democracy throughout the world. That those who can fairly carry an election can also suppress a rebellion. That ballots are the rightful and peaceful successors of bullets. And that when ballots have fairly and constitutionally decided, there can be no successful appeal back to bullets. That there can be no successful appeal except to ballots themselves at succeeding elections. We ask the question when I look at the second moment: did Lincoln, to use the proverbial, walk that walk? Was he willing to surrender power if he was to lose an election? We know many leaders in wartime suspend elections. Would Lincoln hold an election? Would he be willing to surrender power if this was one of the core principles, fair elections? We're going to test that, and history would test Lincoln. The second moment is the summer of 1864. Okay? This is one of the lowest ebbs of the Lincoln administration and of the war. You have a picture here of Cold Harbor, one of the bloodiest moments of the Civil War. Before I get into the summer of 1864, I want to move backward to the Emancipation Proclamation, because Lincoln will also be tested on this. After he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he apparently confided to Schuyler Colfax, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, that the South had fair warning that if they did not return to their duty, I should strike at this pillar of their strength. The promise must now be kept, and I shall never recall one word. He'll be tested. Lincoln will be tested on whether or not he will recall one word to regain election in 1864 when his electoral fortunes sink to their lowest point. And he will be tested whether or not he will maintain the integrity of free elections, one of the causes for suppressing the rebellion. Yes.
Were the states where people succeeded during the second election, they didn't get to vote, did they?
No,
Ah.
not if they were in the Confederacy.
Yeah.
No, the border states did.
Kentucky did.
Kentucky did, yeah. Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, and remnants of order in Missouri. Missouri was pretty chaotic.
And the Crittenden that you mentioned, was he our Kentucky Crittenden?
Yes, I should have, shame on me for not mentioning that.
Okay.
Yes, he was. There's two Crittenden compromises. It's worth mentioning right now. There's this early one in December 1860, which seeks to extend, to maintain peace by extending the Missouri Compromise line, which would have meant extending slavery in areas where the Republicans claimed that they had authority to restrict it. They were bent on restricting all of it as a both moral and legal right. But then once the war started, Crittenden actually proposed another compromise or amendment which said that the government could not touch slavery or interfere with slavery, and that meant even as a war measure. Interestingly enough, they revoked that. Congress revoked it. Congress first enacted it, and then they revoked it, and that made way for the Emancipation Proclamation. But it shows some of the constraints of public opinion. That, you know, people think that Lincoln could have waved a wand, you know, right when he became president and abolished slavery everywhere throughout the Union. It would have completely undermined the Union cause. Okay, so the military situation at this time in the summer, from really May to June 1864, is Grant's overland campaign. And you can see this map. Grant was fighting out west. He had been promoted to as top commander. He's moved to the east, and he drives towards Richmond, where he and Lee conduct this dance, a series of bloody battles known as the Overland Campaign. Some of the most notable battles are the Battle of Wilderness, the Battle of Spotsylvania, the Battle of Cold Harbor, and then Grant stalls at Petersburg before he finally takes Richmond. But the casualties are horrendous, and the nation is war-weary. Let's look at the circumstances. There were 500,000 deaths by this time. There were 55,000 deaths just during the Overland Campaign. 55 Union deaths, or I'm sorry, casualties. 55,000 Union casualties, about 39,000 Confederate casualties. So the nation was war-weary. The Lincoln administration was being challenged by insurgent movements known as the Copperhead, named after poisonous snakes. Now, historians will debate over how serious the Copperhead threat was. Some claim that it was extremely potent in Indiana in particular. And you know, they were sabotaging the Union war effort. They were trying to undermine the draft, and also giving aid to the Confederacy. Lincoln also faced an insurgency from within the Republican Party itself. Chase from Ohio decided to mount a campaign against him. Lincoln discovered this, and Chase was finally dismissed. And there was pressure to renounce the Emancipation Proclamation because electoral fortune sunk to a low. You also have, around this time, a miscegenation. Actually, the word racial mixing and miscegenation is coined in this article here by, I guess we don't really need to know their names, but Crowley and Wakeman of the journal, the newspaper, the New York World. And they claim that the Emancipation Proclamation was an effort on the part of the Republicans to promote racial mixing. I mean, playing upon the worst fears of the American public. And so this is the next step. And this is sent out to Republican Party committees. But it's a hoax to really undermine and discredit the Republican Party in the election of 1864. There were various peace efforts. One is the Niagara Peace Commission in the summer of 1864. Lincoln wanted to get Horace Greeley, the editor of the New York Tribune, out of his way. So he charged him to try and maintain peace for embracing restoration of the Union and the abandonment of slavery. But no, that is going to be controversial because Lincoln's campaign manager is going to urge him to let go of the condition of abandoning slavery for peace, unconditional peace. McClellan and the Republican Party have condemned, the Democratic Party have condemned the Lincoln administration is unconstitutional and condemned the Emancipation Proclamation as unconstitutional. And they've made it clear that they are willing to entertain some peace with the Confederacy if it leads to a preservation of the Union. But the preservation of the Union without the promise of freedom for all human beings. Lincoln says to Charles Robinson around this time, I'm sure you will not on due reflection say that the promise being made must be broken at the first opportunity. I'm sure you would not desire me to say or to leave an inference that I am ready, whenever convenient, to join in re-enslaving those who shall have served us in consideration of our promise. Again, that moment of promise. As a matter of morals, could such treachery by any possibility escape the curses of heaven or any good man? Here's the statesman considering things from a larger, a wider perspective of ultimate judgment or betrayal and treachery. Lincoln's going to be tested. Here he says that there have been men who propose to return to slavery the black soldiers of Port Hudson and Olney to their masters. The black soldiers had been used at this time. And Lincoln said he'd be damned in time and eternity for doing so. He's unwilling to do this. Now, Lincoln's campaign manager, Henry Raymond, a newspaper man, writes him a memo on this time. It's the August 22nd memo that Lincoln has. I've edited it. And he says that it looks like we're going to lose the election. And he talks about this. He says it looks like we're going to lose the state of Illinois, Lincoln's own state. New York is certainly done. Things are not going well. But two causes are assigned to this sinking of electoral fortunes. The one of military success, the overland campaign. Although Grant's driving down south, he's considered a butcher who's just racking up casualties and hoping to exhaust the South. And the impression in some minds, the fear and suspicion in others, that we are not to have peace in any event under this administration until slavery is abandoned. That was, in fact, Lincoln's policy. There would be no peace until slavery was abandoned. Lincoln, on August 23rd, writes this blind memo conceding defeat. He's pretty convinced after he gets the memo from Raymond that the Republicans are going to lose in the election of 1864. Notice it will be his duty to cooperate with the president-elect, not a coup, as maybe a Napoleon would have taken. One can say the ends justifies the means, right? We're the moral high ground. We're against slavery. Therefore, let's suspend the election. I'm not going to cooperate with General George B. McClellan, who called me the original guerrilla. It's to save the Union between the election and inauguration, as he will have secured his election on such ground that he cannot possibly save it afterward. On August 25th, you saw the 22nd, he gets the letter from the campaign manager saying that it looks like the Republicans are going to lose. He writes the blind memorandum, which is to be opened up by his cabinet after the election, conceding defeat. And on the 25th of August, he wrote a memo that entertained the possibility of peace, unconditional peace. And that meant perhaps with abandoning the demand that slavery be abolished as a condition of peace. Never sent it. This is the test. Never sent that memo. The promise the date of the Emancipation Proclamation was kept. Okay? And here, Lincoln, in a response to a serenade on November 10th, 1864, said that the election was a necessity, right? The integrity of free elections. We cannot have free government without free elections. And if the rebellion could force us to forego or postpone a national election, it might fairly claim to have already conquered and ruined us. So in conclusion, these two moments of statesmanship both occur during an electoral crisis. Both test Lincoln's resolution, his firmness, his conviction of core principles. They display the virtue of prudence or practical wisdom, a principled leadership that applies principle under the circumstances, as well as a magnanimity or greatness of soul, an honorable ambition that observes moral boundaries. Lincoln was willing to sacrifice his personal ambition for the sake of a greater good. Lincoln's law partner, William Herndon, famously said that his ambition was a little engine that knew no rest. And certainly Lincoln was ambitious, but his ambition involved a humility that recognized dependence upon a higher power and the distance between the divine will and the human will. I want to conclude with one. I want to conclude with this one slide here. This displays Lincoln's magnanimity, or greatness of soul, in recognizing the distance between the divine and the human will, and in recognizing the importance of honor, yet imbued by a humility and a self-sacrifice. A Quaker woman, Mrs. Gurney, came to the White House in 1862 to provide spiritual consolation to the president. And he was so touched by her prayers that he said the following. He described himself as a humble instrument in the hands of our Heavenly Father, as I am and as we all are, to work out His great purposes. I have desired that all my words and acts may be according to His will, and that it might be so, I have sought His aid. Kind of a humility, a dependence. But if endeavoring to do my best in the light which He affords me, I find my efforts fail, I must believe that for some purpose unknown to me, He wills it otherwise. Kind of a submission to the divine will, a recognition that the divine will is ultimately unfathomable. But that does not paralyze human action. That does not paralyze the capacity for great deeds to uphold one's duty and to remain firm in a time of crisis for the sake of a higher principle. In conclusion, Lincoln's greatness of soul, Lincoln's statesmanship, involves a combination of both goodness and greatness. We often use the term great, I think unfortunately, to describe influential leaders. Hitler was great. Stalin was great. Mao was great. Well, they were great in their wickedness. I'd like to return to the more traditional understanding of greatness as including moral goodness. We do well today to gather and celebrate this rare combination in our 16th president. In a cynical age, our vision of greatness, of political greatness, is blinded by corruption, moral relativism, political correctness, apathy. It is the task to point out models that may inspire us in our daily lives and to inspire future leaders. I'm very proud to assist in this good work and to be a guest of the McConnell Center this evening in doing this. Thank you so much.
We have time for 2 questions, so I'll come around with the mic. And please wait for the mic before you ask your question.
Maybe they won't count mine because I'd already asked one. But was Jefferson Davis appointed to the presidency? And when you were talking about Lincoln's second election, did Davis go through an election at that period?
Was Davis elected?
Or appointed?
Was he appointed or elected? Jeff Davis. He would, what was Davis appointed? Davis was appointed.
Did he have
Davis
a
was
second
appointed.
election when Lincoln had a second election? No, he did not.
No. Yes, please.
And who appointed him?
The delegates, I think, yeah, the delegates who met in, originally it was Montgomery and then moved to Richmond. The delegates. I guess it's kind of an election. We got to have more questions, are we?
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
One more? Yes.
Where did you do most of your research? What institutions or what books or where did you do your research? Where did you do most of your research?
Well, I think Lincoln's own speeches and writings, that I looked at. But I think, what do you mean, like what influences? I went to SUNY Geneseo, State University of New York, and I was very fortunate, as I think you folks are, to have a mentor who was very rigorous and interested in great thought and great books, and actually interested in Lincoln. When I went to Catholic University, interestingly enough, there were some criticisms about Lincoln. There were those who were critical of Lincoln, who thought he was a great centralizer. And that kind of provoked me into thinking a little more deeply about Lincoln. And at the same time, I was reading Aquinas, and I was reading natural law, and I was reading Aristotle. And I thought that, Lincoln really embodied, indeed, many of, the norms that Aristotle and Aquinas were describing, like magnanimity or greatness of soul, for example. As I read that in the Summa Theologia, I was like, this is Lincoln. This is someone who's great, but the greatness also consists of a humility. He was conscious, Lincoln was clearly conscious of his superiority over others, but it didn't lapse into a hubristic overreach. He wasn't blinded by vanity. It was always kind of, his ambition was an interest, but it was always subordinated to serving the greater good, a kind of servant leadership. And that would be an example. Yeah, that's helpful.
Well, the United States military has a tradition of giving challenge coins to those who have provided exemplary service. And for the last few years, the McConnell Center has been able to be a part of this tradition. 2016 marks our 25th anniversary, and to commemorate our history and those who have served our cause, the center has created a new challenge coin that will be awarded for just the second time this evening. The coin features a door on one side, and the door stands for all of the doors that have been opened for our McConnell scholars by those who have provided internships or scholarships, advice, and experiences. And the reverse side of the coin has been designed to look like a book and represents all those who have contributed to our intellectual development and our imaginations over the years, including, of course, our speaker tonight. So, Dr. Fornieri, on behalf of the McConnell Center, it's my pleasure to present you with this small token of our appreciation.
I'm touched. I'm touched. Thank you. I'm really touched.
And now if you'll
Thank
help
you
us
so
with
much.
we have a small book drawing to do for your latest
Oh,
book,
please.
so-
This is great. Beautiful.
So if you'll just pick a name out of the box.
This poor person's got to read the book now, right? It is Girish Kotwal. Girish Kotwal. Kotwal.
Thank you all for coming tonight, and feel free to head outside, and we have some cake for President Lincoln's birthday, so feel free to enjoy a piece of cake. And our next event is on March 7th, and Kent Masterson Brown talking about the Kentucky resolution. So let's give one more round of applause to Dr. Fornieri.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Huh?
Was that too long?